Mark, happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday, Matt. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Nice to meet you.
You as well. I like
Ha-
your setup, dude, with all like the what was it all the like the little trinkets on your was that a cork board, all that kind of stuff. I love it when people got space like that.
That's right. That's right. I can't take credit. It's a studio a couple blocks from our office, but we really love this setup.
Oh, I love that. So yeah, you see, that's the thing. I think with these sorts of things, you gotta have the environment, right? You gotta have something.
Yeah. Yeah, well, in this modern work world where we're on so many Zoom calls, we got to make it interesting for everyone we're on calls with, right? Which clearly you got the memo of.
Right,
I'm
exactly.
liking
You
the
know
neon
what? And the thing
lights.
is half of this is because I enjoy this stuff. Like it's all
Right,
my
right.
toys and stuff like that. That I'm like, if I gotta stay in my office for like 6 hours, 7 hours at a time, I like to be around stuff I enjoy.
Amen. Amen. That physical environment makes all the difference. 100%.
Amen, brother. Where are you
Yeah.
located at, Matt?
Brooklyn. How about you?
Brooklyn. Okay, I'm out of Detroit.
Awesome. Awesome. So do you guys get a fall or does it just go straight from summer to winter over there?
Oh no, we get the fall. This is like one of those places where, especially you get up in the northern parts of Michigan, and you get all the colors, all the stuff, all the tourists flock up here. Just kind of like Vermont is, I think, probably in the
Sure.
East Coast. That's kind of we're that for the many of folks, and so the tourists
Wow.
keep coming up and up to see all the leaves changing. So the thing that we don't see very often, though, it's just kind of sad, is we don't see the winter anymore. Like it kind of sits into
Really?
where we're at, it gets to about fall, and like we don't probably like we haven't seen we last year we didn't see snow until like January some point,
Interesting. That
and it
is
would
not what
even
Detroit
there it
is
was
like in
super
my
light. Like
brain.
maybe we got three snows.
Wow. Yeah, in my mind when I picture Detroit, it's either summer or it's snowy.
It's snowy, right? You know what? Back in the day, it used to be that way, and I miss those days.
Back in the
It's like
day.
nowadays just spits at you, and I was like, oh, like it's gonna be kind of cold. Like let it snow at least. Come on.
Right. Right. Give me something nice to look at. I will say I've only been to Michigan twice, and once was just on my way into Canada, but the other time was in the summer. And I remember who I was with. I turned to her and I was like, I honestly did not expect Michigan to be this beautiful.
I know, dude. It's like one of those treasures out there, especially if you get out into like near the lakes and stuff like that. Oh, it's like going up north a little bit. We got like Traverse City, big area for like tourism, but it's beautiful up there. My wife went up to lives. She grew up just in south of what is the Mackinac Bridge up there, and
Okay.
I tell you what, it's just. I mean, it's like you look around and you're like, whoa, like. How am I in the middle of like just nowhere? But at the same time, I'm close to a bunch of stuff, and it's just
Yeah.
beautiful.
Wow. All right. So before we dive in, I'm curious: is there anything you want to make sure we absolutely don't touch on, or anything that we absolutely make sure we do touch on?
No, I'm pretty much an open book on these sorts of things. I love it. There's nothing that I can think of unless you. The only thing I'll say is unless you were to bring up some like super negative news around Atlassian, that would probably be the only thing that I'd be like, oh, we gotta kind of stick away from that. I don't know
Sure.
any news like that,
I was
so
about to
you'd
say
probably
if
be
if
surprising
there are any,
me.
you guys have a great PR team because I
I
haven't
know,
seen
right?
it.
That's the thing. If you bring up something, you're like one of those journalists. Where you're like, Mark, in my hand, I have.
All right, I'm
I
glad
don't
you're
know of
I'm
anything
glad you're here.
bad.
Welcome to 60 Minutes with Matt. Now for the
I know,
hard
right?
hitting
Tell me how
questions.
you feel about this.
Great. Great. Well, any questions for me before we dive into it?
No, I'm excited, dude. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, so I'll come in and I'll do the intros later. So I'm just gonna like pause for a minute and we'll do a greeting and then we'll hop into the first question.
Perfect.
All right, we are live. Mark, nice to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here. We're gonna have a great conversation today.
you know, as I was getting ready for this conversation, I was looking back through your LinkedIn profile, and my first question for you is really about your story. And the
Mm,
thing that really stuck out to me is if you look at what you studied when you got your bachelor's nearly 2 decades ago now, and then
I
when you went
know.
to get your master's, it's almost like you knew that your career trajectory was going to land you exactly where you are right now. So I'm really
You know, it's
curious about that.
it's so funny you say that. You know what? There's something I found in my career so far is that anybody who's in my role used to be an accountant. I don't know why that's the case. So, like, I
Interesting.
went to school for accounting in my bachelor's degree. I also went to school for psychology. That
Yeah,
was the thing that really put me on the path where I'm at today.
sure.
But it was funny because, I didn't know what I wanted to learn then. But I was fascinated by the quantitative elements. And then when it came down, and then I happened to be like, I'm really interested in the psychology stuff. I took a class and I was like, oh, I love this. And And that got me really interested in terms of how people think, how people work. And alongside that, I was doing some stuff with technology. And so I then, after graduating, went off, started doing my working thing, but I also went to school for my master's in human-centered design and engineering, which I love the title of that.
Yeah,
Like,
what is
right? I
that?
mean, it's like, what is that? But it really became this aspect of figuring out how people accomplish the things that they're trying to do
Hmm.
and what barriers are kind of in their way. And for me, it really came down to like it's user-centered design, it's usability research, it's these sorts of elements. It's really trying to teach you, you know, how intentional you need to be in order to accomplish a goal. And I think that to me really put me, to your point, on a pathway where I've always been fixated on this aspect of organizational design, how people work. And I've meandered around in my career in different places that gave me new and kind of, gnarly problems to play with. And I think and it was all centered around how do people solve problems?
Sure.
And that's where I've kind of ultimately found myself today as a modern work coach at Atlassian, where I get to help some of our biggest customers really look at not just the tools they're using, but really the problems that they're focused on and help them figure out how to solve those. And then just so happens to be that we've got some great products that can help them do that.
Sure. And I'm curious, studying human centered design and engineering, getting your master's in that, and then going into the workforce. I'm curious really early in your career
Hmm.
and in those first few jobs, what was that experience like? Was that one of like glee and fulfillment and enthusiasm? Like, look at all these amazing companies that are clearly incorporating human centered design principles and how we operate, and things just flow seamlessly. Was there frustration? What was that experience like for you early?
Oh, I love this. It's a story I like to tell is that the area I kind of landed myself in predominantly my career was this area of agile software development, which people out there are familiar with agile software developments, iterative developments. How do you develop technology quickly with feedback from your customers? And
Sure.
I started out my first job in a role where it was basically a rotational job where I took 6 months in different factors of the business. I was working actually for Boeing at the time. And my very first job was that of a programmer. So coming fresh out of school, wide-eyed, bushy tail, let's do this thing. I remember my first day of work, my manager at the time, he comes, gets me, brings me through the building. And at the time, you've got this, Boeing had this big technology hub over in Bellevue, Washington. And we start going through one of the buildings, and it is everything you'd expect from a corporate world, the vanilla cubicles, just up past your head, it's just dark, dark, dark. But I always go back to then we're going through these things, and then all of a sudden we open up as we're walking into this big space. And what I see in the middle, they've got all these desks brought together, all the barriers, all the dividers were removed. Along the walls, they've got a bunch of like big pieces of sticky paper. And come to find out, this was a software team that was playing with this idea of Scrum, which is one of these ways of applying agile software development. And I remember getting there, and my manager says, "Hey, we're going in for our daily scrum. Come check it out." And the next 6 months in that job were just so fulfilling because I got to work really closely with my team. I had the opportunity to learn new things. We got to put stuff in front of customers quickly. It was amazing. And so like that was my first taste of like corporate world. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is great." So I think you know where this is going at this point. So, you know, I did this, and then my rotation ends. Oh, tears, everything. Oh, it was a great time, guys. I'm gonna go check out the next thing. And so
Sure.
I take a job as a project manager in a security part of our group. And I remember same deal. First day of that new rotation, manager meets me at the door, takes me in. We're walking, we're walking, we're walking. I'm excited, I'm excited. And then he points over here and he says, "Here's your cubicle." I'm like, "Oh,"
Dun dun
and nobody else
dun.
there. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, and it's just same old corporate one you'd expect. And I says, "Oh," I'm looking around. I don't see a soul. And I said, "Hey, where's my team?" He says, "Well, you got a couple people about 3 floors up. The rest of the team is over in building C, which is just down the road." But he says, "You don't got to worry about that. You're only going to need to talk to them like once a week, all the stuff you got to do." I was like, "Oh." And that next 6 months really showed me what I never wanted work to be for me. It was that
Mm.
aspect of I was lonely. I tried bringing out ideas. Like I remember I even talked to my boss, but like, hey, what if we tried this Scrum thing the other people were doing? And he says, oh no, we don't do that over here. And just this pure reluctance to think outside the box, to reimagine how you work. And so after that role, it kind of solidified for me. And at the time, of course, I'm going through my master's program and I'm really
Right.
thinking about this element. And I'm like, it's not just about solving problems for people. It's solving problems for how people work together. And that's a hugely untapped area. And so the rest of then after that, I kind of made it my mission. Like I never want people to go through what I went through in that second rotation, which unfortunately is a huge portion of the workforce. But I wanted everyone to experience what's possible when you do throw it all out and reimagine stuff. And so that's really, again, for me, that defined my career. Like if it wasn't for that, I never would have been here. And so I thank
Wow.
both those opportunities because again, they shaped me to the person I am today.
Yeah, what a powerful experience to be going through that master's program, studying everything on the principles of human-centered design and all of these different ideas that then that sparks of how to systemize and how to upgrade
Yes.
processes and the best in class of how things can be done to then also be a project manager on a team where you're struggling to be able to get buy-in and support to be able to innovate any of those systems.
Right, exactly. Basically, we've done it this way forever, and you're gonna keep doing it this way. And it's like, wow, there's gotta be a different way. And I mean, this was 15 years ago too, and so we were already pretty innovative. The world was moving quicker, but today, especially contrast that to today, and just the fact that like a world like that what doesn't survive anymore. You
Sure,
have to think about it. And I think that's one of the big areas where a lot of organizations continue to still struggle today is
sure.
they don't know how to reimagine those things. And I think that when they think about reimagining, they think of it as this huge, to lack of a better word, they call it a transformation. They think of it as a transformation. We have to take the system and make the system anew.
A lot of
And
extra work.
yeah, all the sector, and you know what? I can count on my hands the number of transformations that I've seen actually see some success. Like
Mm,
9 times out of 10, transformations fail because all it is trying to apply something to a system, and the system, it's like an organ. If you don't put the right organ in, it's just going to reject it.
right.
And so all this money, all these consultants brought in to do this, and at the end of the day, they revert back, and it's because they don't understand how to create consistent change. It's not about one-time change. It's about a
Right.
mindset of continuous change and about experimenting. It's saying, hey, I want to try this thing. Okay, cool. What did we learn? All right, didn't work. Cool. Let's try it again. Let's try a new thing. And having that those are the things that I find that, again, you see best in class organizations. Those are the things that differentiate them. And for me, that's been something even more today we need to see just because of the pace of technology, the economy and how it continues to kind of contract a little bit. We have to find ways to work more effectively. Really, that's what and efficiency is going to come, I always say, from our tooling. Efficiency, you got to use tools to be efficient. That solves it. Automation, AI, all that sort of stuff. That helps you do that. But if you can't be effective, you're just going to be efficient in the wrong direction.
Right. Efficiency doesn't help you if you're pointed at the pointed at the wrong
Exactly.
things.
Exactly.
Well, and the story I'll often tell around this sort of problem is there's a there's a struggle happening right now in our world around the gap between what we know works and what
Mm,
we're actually doing at work as far as systems and processes and actions that we're taking. And so
hmm
there's so many leaders that are responsible for how people get work done and the systems that support and empower their work who just don't know what they don't know. And so
hmm
it can feel like for that leader or for that leadership team, it's more time efficient to look for like one intervention or one
hmm
big upgrade that we can implement because then we do it that one time and it's good. But
Yep.
like a simple explanation I'll give to people is like, have you ever seen anybody, like just think of your friends in your life or think of yourself in your life? Have you ever seen somebody go on one big retreat and they come back and then immediately their life is just better for like 6 months? No, they go to the big thing and it's amazing for like 2 weeks. They're like filled with some inspiration and some ideas. And within a few weeks, 80% of what they learned is gone because
Yeah.
changing
And they're back
behavior
to
is hard.
their old normal, right?
Totally, totally. Because changing behavior is hard,
hmm
and we're so much more environmental than
Hmm.
we like to admit that we are. That we are such products of our environment, and so it has to be about shaping our systems. It's that great James Clear quote, right? Which is, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And
Yes.
so it's it's this interesting challenge right now around how do we not just give people the resources and the systems to be able to transform how they operate, but also how do we get people to open their eyes and to really buy into this understanding that in order to radically change your culture or to radically enhance performance or to minimize inefficiencies, you have to really be thinking about the system or the entire
Hmm.
organism of your team and how they operate. And so I'm
It's all
curious.
about like this idea, and we like to talk about it at Atlassian as this aspect of autonomy with alignment. Like you need
Say
to
more about that.
have, yeah. So for us, it's about like we want teams to have ownership because we find that teams that own their ways of working are much more likely to actually be successful and change how they work than those, again, when I apply to a system, the system likes to push back. So I want to
Sure.
give you I want to say, go and accomplish this large outcome and you figure out how you get there. The thing is, though, is that as a startup, as a small company, you can have ultimate autonomy. It's great. But as you get bigger, the issue that we find is that many of these now autonomous teams need to now coordinate, need to work together to get there. And so for us, we need kind of like the MVP of alignment. Like what's that minimal
Yeah.
viable level of alignment that we need to
Yeah.
make sure that we can still have our autonomy but connect together. And so for us, I think about a lot of times where I work with our customers, and some big areas I find is things like even just something as simple as their workflow and how they work in their
Yeah.
teams. They want that autonomy of having like, oh, I want to set up my workflow this way. But it kind of going back to my human-centered design experience, a lot of times, what's the quote that they say Ford said, but he actually never said? It's like if you asked a person what they wanted, they would have wanted a faster horse. A lot of
Right.
times,
Right.
teams can't see the forest for the trees right in front of them, and so
Right.
for them, we try to do is say, well, let's talk about what you're trying to actually accomplish, because
Hmm.
there actually might be a common workflow that you all can get on because it actually is something that still accomplishes your goal. And so it's trying to find those areas like that to align, because when I have like a common workflow, now all of a sudden I can have that higher level of alignment in my organization. I can see actually across teams, because so often you get in, especially when you're dealing with tooling, and you get teams that are like using different things. It's apples, oranges, bananas, cars, you name it. The problem is now when they're doing that, they get to a point where now I can't make sense of what's happening across my organization. And so I think that's where we've got to find what's that MVP of alignment that we need. And that's what we mean when we say give the autonomy, but find those scraps, those lines that we need to draw still.
Yeah, I really love that. It's a really simple framework to really think about as a leader.
Hmm.
And we call it minimum viable structure. Like we
Ooh,
tend
I
to think
love
of, like,
that.
right? Like we tend to think that, oh my gosh, we need to introduce some structure. It's going to be suffocating. It's going to be extra work. But it's like, if you just introduce, like, actually what we're trying to figure out is what's the least amount of structure you need. And then the next
Hmm.
question comes, okay, well, if we're going to build minimum viable structure, well, what do we need to make sure that we're really optimizing for? And what you've really laid out nicely is you really want to build the system that maximizes both alignment and autonomy at the same time. That you
Yep.
can't just maximize alignment, or you can't just maximize autonomy where people then will just operate in silos, and then there's going to be inefficiencies in terms of how they collaborate. And you can't just
Hmm.
maximize alignment, because then people might not have ownership or enough flexibility to be doing things that are right for them. The question is, how do you maximize alignment, making sure that there are those shared threads that maximize efficiency between people, but then also enhancing the autonomy so people have the flexibility and ownership to really thrive and feel like they're able to crush in their space.
One of the interesting things with this too, as you bring it up, is you're 100% right. It should be it like that, and the thing is, when you hear it too, everyone's like, "That's super simple." Like the thing is the only way I find it works is that you have to have constant intentional engagement with that system. Like you
Hmm.
have to, like, that goes back to that manager. Sometimes what we want to do as a leader, we want to buy the thing at the store, we want to get the
Yeah.
OEM product and then put it in place and be like, see it fixed. But that's
Right.
not how
Right.
it works.
Right.
It's like you can't even with structure, minimal viable structure, you put that structure in place and then you walk away.
Right,
That
right,
structure is going to start to degrade the moment you walk away. And so it's like it's that, and I
right.
think that's one of the things I've learned in my career is that aspect of like you have to can be consistently vigilant. You have to be always looking
Mm,
to tweak your system. It's always something where the moment you put something in place, one of my colleagues said this once, and I love this. We were putting a large framework in place in an organization, and the day we brought it about, and the colleague says, today is the first day we start dismantling that framework.
mm,
Because the idea is that it's there now we need to start adapting it. As we start exposing it to oxygen, as people start interacting and we find the things that need to change, we need to change it. And I
I
think
love
that's the
that.
hard part that I find a lot of organizations struggle with, a lot of leaders, because I think they struggle to figure out what their role is in that. And honestly, I think that's the biggest piece of their role is to help be vigilant of the system and look for those opportunities to continuously tweak and improve, getting feedback from the teams, but also getting feedback from higher up in the chain and understanding, hey, what's needed here, and constantly changing the gears and moving the knobs to help get that in alignment because it's always going to be out of alignment. You just have to
Totally.
constantly be tweaking.
Yeah, and that's one of the fun pieces of using that language of minimum viable product or minimum viable structure with tech companies because you get that
Hmm.
with your product that it's
Mm.
never done. You're always iterating it. You
Yep.
always have to be connected to the data of what are your users experiencing, and you always have to be problem solving with that and trying new things, and you have to be always auditing what is happening and what could we be innovating. And it's the same thing with your organizational culture system or your collaboration systems. And to your point, it's it's really not extra work. The whole point here is as a leader, you are inherently responsible for that system. But if you're not
Hmm.
intentionally auditing what you're doing and trying to create processes rooted in some sort of frameworks or principles and then consistently intentionally iterate that, then it's just unintentionally being shaped. And so there's
Yeah.
naturally going to be ineffectiveness in there. So it's just like a
Then it starts
deeper ownership
drifting in
of it.
ways that you don't expect to, and it's really
Right.
hard to correct it
Right.
when it drifts too much. That's when all of a sudden the
Yeah.
system, and then when you try to tweak it back into place, the system revolts a little bit, and so that's why it's that idea like if you're constantly thinking about it, if you're constantly making those tweaks. You don't have to make big changes. I mean, that's what we learned from back in the day in old school software development, where you put it all together and not show anybody and then go ta-da. It's usually a ta-blah. It's one of those things where it doesn't work out. But if you're constantly making changes, you're getting feedback, you might go backwards, but you're going to take two steps forward in a very quick amount of time. And so that's where it's like, how do we help our leaders think like that? That it's not about the tool you're building. You're responsible for that system, and you need to approach your system with the same user-centered, agile approach to help you think about that iterative nature of work.
Yeah. And as we're talking about this, as far as systemizing how we as a team or a company collaborate, there's two sort of interesting paths here. One is a lot of the work that you do within your
Mm,
role, but then another is just the company that you work for.
mm.
So I'm curious if you could take us down the road, just in case anyone's listening and they're like, "What is Atlassian?" They've probably heard of Atlassian, or at least have heard of one or several of the products that are underneath the Atlassian umbrella. So could you give us a quick explanation of what is it that Atlassian does, and then what is it that you do with Atlassian?
Yeah. It's funny. I like to joke around that Atlassian is like the biggest company you've never heard of.
Right,
It's
right.
like it's one of those companies that we are ingrained in the ways of working across most of the Fortune 500. Most every organization is engaged in our products because if you've ever used a product like Jira or Confluence or Trello, Loom is a recent product from us. These are all tools that help drive collaboration. And so for us, our whole mission at the organization is to unleash the potential of every team. And so for us, we try to find ways to help you get that efficiency. Now, a big thing from us too is also saying you can't just have the tooling; you have to have the ways of working. And so we put out something called the Atlassian Team Playbook, which is something I care deeply about because it has to do with my role. And it's all about sharing the ways of working we use here at Atlassian, these different practices that help make us as we've grown from in the last 20 years from two guys in a backyard, in a backyard garage building Jira to now 14,000 people distributed around around the world. And so for us, these practices have helped us grow everything from how we make decisions to how we retrospect to how we even meet remotely. That's are some new things we have. And so we have over, was it 50 plays? I think there's like 55 plays nowadays that are publicly available. You don't even have to be our customer. We just want to unleash that potential. And
Cool.
so you go out there, you find it. There's all these step-by-step plays. And so that kind of plays into my role. And so I've got a fun and unique role at the organization
Yeah, it's a
that
cool title. Even just
I
even
know,
just the
right? You
title
know
is like,
what?
oh my gosh, what does
I
that
got
guy
to make
do?
up that title too. I love that. I love it when when you can make up your own title. And so I'm a modern work coach. And the reason I picked that title was when I started at Atlassian about 5 years ago, I was working with a lot of our biggest customers with their large implementation. So I was on our services side of the business and I came in to help provide a practices lens to how they approach that, because so often we have a network of partners that help us implement our tooling, and those that tooling can be put in place, but just like we were talking about, I can efficiently go to the wrong spot. And so many customers do that because they haven't thought about those ways of working. And so I came in to say, hey, large organizations that are going through this, let's take a step back and let's do some discovery. Let's try to do some of those user-centered design practices to think about, hey, how do we, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? How do we potentially solve that? And so I did that for a few years. And one of the things I got really passionate about was how do we now go beyond just our basic customers. Like, again, our mission is to unleash potential of every team. It doesn't mean they have to be a customer. And so I raised my hand, and my boss, he's our work futurist, his name's Don Price, fantastic guy. I said, hey, I would love to do some more engagements outside of Atlassian to help our
Mm,
help the world kind of think about how we work. And he's like, yes, I need somebody to do that. And so I came in and took on this role of modern as a modern work coach to really do one of three things. It's one to help spread those ways of working, share those beyond just our walls, because it's such a rich set of ideas and practices. And it's also then to do that activation and enablement. I spent a lot of my time with our customers, but I also spent a lot of time with like the public doing workshops, helping them think about, hey, how do you approach something as simple as my team is distributed around the world and we don't know how to best meet together.
yeah.
Let's do a workshop on that. Let's talk about the problem and then we'll talk about how you can do it. And then doing a lot of external events just to again showcase some of these things we do. So for me, it's a blast. I keep saying I'm going to do it until they tell me I'm not allowed to do it anymore, because I, as you could tell, I have no fun at all, no fun at all in this job.
What would you say you love most about the work that you do on a day-to-day basis?
I think it's the aha moments and the act through the activations that we do. I'm a huge fan of facilitation and workshop development because I think I can go and I can give you do a great presentation. I can share with you an idea. And you can think a little differently from that. But I find that getting that kind of hands-on playing with an idea that gives you the ability to actually let that imprint on you. And so
Yeah.
sitting in and saying something and then saying, let's get our hands dirty and actually play with this idea. We're going to run a play. We're going to do something like that. And seeing that aha moment where they're basically like, "Oh, I I never thought of it like that." Like every time that happens, like I tell you what, that's a dollar in my bucket right there. I feel like that is what fills the battery for me. And
Can you
so
tell us about
for
one of those
me,
recent
that's been a
ones?
huge part of my role.
Yeah, can you tell us about one of those recent ones of like, an exercise or a story or a
Yeah.
conversation that you sparked with some folks where then there were some aha moments that got unlocked in that room?
So I do a lot of events for C-suites because the interesting thing is that everybody is on a team, including a C-suite. The C-suite is a team, but so often they don't think of themselves as that. They think of themselves as just owners of departments.
Mm,
And so I actually sat down with a group, and it was about a month ago, and we did a 2-day workshop on just the concept of how do we have better meetings in our organization, because this was
sure.
a big bank. They were struggling with just that meeting overload. And so what we did is we got together and we spent some time building out a couple different things together. One, we evaluated the current meeting culture. One of the plays in our playbook is called a ritual reset, and so it's all about taking inventory of what you do and actually having a honest conversation of like, are we doing this well? Is this value added, or is this something that needs to change? And then one of the big things we did from that then is say, all right, let's establish some philosophies for ourselves. And so we actually established 10 philosophies of like, what does it mean to meet in this organization? And it's funny because when you think about meetings, I know meetings are like the thing everyone's got the meeting hammer, and so everyone's banging on those nails out there. But the thing is that it's such a simple thing, and we think it's such a simple thing, but if you don't treat it right, if you don't think about it intentionally, it's the thing that will devour you. And so for
Yeah,
them, this was an organization that's exactly it. It says we have to come up with some philosophy, some things you believe in. They came up with these things. We went and then I had them spend an afternoon rebuilding, a series of meetings. And some of the things that came out of that, especially going into the day two, because it was the 2 days were separated so they can go and experiment. Like their homework was to go, now go run your new meeting. A lot of the ahas was that they didn't realize that one of the things is they were the obstacle for those times. They didn't realize the meeting was happening for them, or they didn't realize that they really did need to actually think about like spending that time before the meeting actually prepping for it. It's not just to show
sure.
up and let's do this thing. And so from that, they already even started quantifying hours of time that they were saving. And again, we're talking about C-suite folks. And so these individuals have a lot of important things to do. And now we're saving them 10, 20, 30% of their time just because they're being a little bit more intentional about their time. And so for me, I love like even something as simple as that kind of workshop is just so rewarding to see that then go into an organization and especially at that level trickle down. Because now guess what? They're leading by example. They're showing what good looks like. They're encouraging their people to do it and vice versa. And now we've started like knocking over those first dominoes to help that organization think about how do we get more intentional with our time?
Yeah, that's huge. You know, I hear you with the meeting hammer, and I think especially with this, remote hybrid
Hmm.
model that we've really spurred into in the last 7 years, that is now really sticking around despite the big stories with
Oh, I
Amazon.
know,
There's
right? Like
still
the world has changed. It is not, yes, you're going to have some companies go back, but you can't put Pandora back in its box.
right, right, and we're even seeing that there are a bunch of policies that are popping out saying minimum return to office. But you look at the Census Bureau in the last 2 years, it's basically a flat line as far
Hmm.
as the hybrid model. It's still very hybrid out there, and a big problem that comes up with that is, well, people's sense of connectedness is harder
Mm.
to maintain and grow because you're not having those organic, water cooler moments. And so the simple solution can feel like, oh well, we'll add in more meetings, and
Yeah.
meetings are
We'll
great
find out
because
time to actually go and just have connection time, and
yeah,
that'll be a
which
meeting.
yeah, and meetings are great because there's so much combined wisdom in that room. There's an opportunity to connect with other people, and there's nothing we crave more than connection with others.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing more powerful than like a really purposeful, meaningful meeting with people you feel cared about.
Yep.
And there's nothing more damaging to somebody's experience of being on a team or being part of a culture than really bad meetings, whether it's a bad one on one or a bad group
Hmm.
meeting, because that feels like an experience of that person in relation to the entire business. And so
Oh,
you,
yeah.
you have poorly run meetings, which just means you don't have solid structure, you don't have people who are skilled at running that meeting, and you're going to be having a negative impact on
Yep.
people's engagement, their experience of trust, and you're just wasting time. And there's a ton of money that goes into meetings
Oh,
because you
we
pay
actually did
people
some
tons of
research
money.
earlier this year on, we called it workplace woes, and we did it on meetings. One of the biggest stats we find is that, 70% of meetings from the 5,000 people out in the world that we talk to, 70% of their meetings were ineffective, and it
Wow.
just goes back to like good hygiene and etiquette, and it doesn't have to be hard. The
Yeah.
thing is that means that, they had all these meetings, even if, and like, I'm not anti-meeting. That's what I tell people. I'm like, I'm anti-bad meeting. If every meeting
Amen.
I had during the day was like a solid home run, like I'm like, yeah, I got some value out of that. I don't care. I could totally be filled with it because that
Right,
means I'm
right.
moving the ball forward every meeting. But most of those, again, 70% of the time, we're going to something and we're like, wow, that was a waste of time. Like, oh, I just gotta, I guess I'm gonna go multitask here. And again,
Right.
that just makes it ineffective.
Yeah, and it's actually reversing the way that a lot of companies think about meetings, which is, oh, we're not sure how to address whatever problem there is here, or there's something we need to talk about. We're not sure
Hmm.
what to do, so we'll have a meeting about it. And instead of thinking, oh, when you aren't sure of what structure to use to move through an uncertainty, instead of throwing a meeting at it and thinking, great, that's how we'll create the structure, it's actually reversing and thinking, anytime that we have a meeting, we need to have clear intention of what we want to be getting out of that meeting and how we're going to be structuring. If you're going to have a meeting, you actually need more structure.
Yep. 100%. Well, and it's funny. One of the things that we've really adopted, and something that we're a huge proponent of as we work with our customers and the public, is this idea of async first. And
Mm,
so we say, hey, you should default to async. And if you find as you're going through that decision tree, if you're like, can I do this through a Slack message, email? One of our tools that we absolutely love, and we acquired the company because we use it all the time, was called Loom, which is
sure.
async video. If we can accomplish it through those mechanisms and still reach our goal and allow people to handle those things on their own time, wonderful. But if we come across a situation where we're like, we need a decision quickly, or this is going to need some back and forth, some debate, then we'll say, all right, we've gone through the tree, and now we've got to the point where we say, okay, maybe a meeting is needed. And of course, as you go down further in that tree, more structure is needed as you go. And so now you got to
Sure.
think like, okay, how would I structure this? How am I going to make sure that the outcome I need, which is the reason for the meeting, is accomplished? And I think that's something that it's interesting. When I'm in the process right now of building a facilitation course, and it really is
Cool.
focused in on how do you take a outcome that you need to achieve and actually achieve it through some simple structures. Because again, it's not rocket science. It's not crazy. What it is some intentional practices like an established agenda, the right sort of, activities to elicit ideas. And if you come into a brainstorming and you don't know how to do like how to get people talking and going back and forth with each other, you won't accomplish your goal. And so for me, I think it's if you learn those sorts of things, then you can accomplish that goal. And you might find then that you don't need the hour long meeting and you needed 30 minutes because you've effectively structured that.
Amen. All right, I have an AI question for you.
All right,
Um,
bring it.
and so, for us at Mattermore, we have an AI manager co-pilot that provides adaptive training and feedback to managers so
Mm.
that a
Hmm.
lot of those basics can be happening. And so you can flag really what you're doing well, particularly as you're having one-on-ones with your team members. And so about 50% of our customers are large enterprises, and the other 50% are scaling up, whether it's Series
Oh.
D and beyond. And
Yep.
so particularly with those companies that are scaling up, there's this giant change management question monster right now for everybody, right? Which is immediately actually related to Atlassian, because a lot of those customers, they'll be asking questions like, okay, we're scaling up now. We want to be putting more processes in place. Should we use something like Trello and Jira? Or should we be asking ourselves, how can we be using AI so that we can minimize how many tools our people actually have to be using to keep
Hmm.
track of stuff? And so, as you're working with companies and they're sort of holding this question of how do we decide what tools to use and how do we decide where we should be innovating with AI, both internally and with our
Hmm.
business, how do you help folks sort of dive into that question?
A lot of it comes back down to one of my favorite tools is value stream mapping. And a lot of it comes down to actually looking at what they're doing at their work. Because I think AI, of course, is one of those things that 2 years ago, which blows my mind that 3.5 came out, was in November of 2022. And you think about the world today now,
Feels like a
uh, you
lifetime
know,
ago.
right? It's like, whoa. But like in the last 2 years, everybody's thrown AI into their products. And the problem that I see with that is that there might be some good intention around what they're putting into their product, but they don't think about how that impacts the greater ecosystem. It goes back to the system we talked about because their product is just one step in larger value stream. And so for me, a lot of that conversation starts going in. It's like, yes, you could use AI for that, but the question really is should you use AI for that?
Right.
And so we start looking at our process, and I like to say, let's look at like how we get from A to Z. Let's talk about these pieces, and now we start talking about the optimization pieces. Now we start saying like, hey, one, what tools are we using? Oh my gosh, we've got 9 tools across this thing. No wonder we're inefficient. So we might look to do some consolidation instead of having, and like a lot of times, the problem is that many organizations look at their function and they value stream that. They don't think about the actual like the user life cycle or like the truly like idea to retirement kind of thing of a product. And so when you get them to step back, you start realizing, oh, so your software teams are using Jira to track their work, your marketing teams are using Monday, and your finance teams are using spreadsheets, and all of a sudden you realize the problem never was, that, oh, is it AI, or is it this tool is bad or that tool is bad? No, we just have no consistency in terms of how we think about how work flows across this. And so for us, this goes right back down to that being intentional about that. It's thinking about that alignment. And so we
Mm,
say, all right, cool. If you want, like, your marketing team says, we love Monday, we want to keep perfect. Let's figure out how Monday and Jira talk to each other. So that way, now instead of you having to manually go over and talk to somebody else, you actually can get that insights. And that's where we can start saying, hey, is like maybe an AI integration agent something that would be very beneficial here. And so for us, that's one of the biggest pieces that we look at is, you know, I think of it as I call it the Jurassic Park problem. You know, we get so obsessed with the fact that we could do something like AI. We never stop to, take a step back and ask whether or not we should use AI. And that's the thing for me is, again, if we look at the whole system, that's when we can get intentional about those elements. And so for us, that's even as we're building it, we built it into our products. And as we built it in there, the goal is to help you with what we consider the jobs to be done when you're in our system.
mm,
Our AI agents could do a lot more, but our goal is to say, if you're in Confluence, we're going to have a writing assistant for you, someone who's going to help you, because that's likely what you're going to do. We're going to have someone who can help search and index all of your data so that we can help find information from you, because it's likely something you're trying to do. In Jira, you're likely trying to write content. In
sure.
Bitbucket, you're likely trying to automate some tasks. And so I think that's for us one of the big areas is how do we intentfully deploy it? Because AI will be whatever we want it to be at some level. And
Sure.
so for us, it's just how we think about it. And I always go back to that jobs to be done. How do we think about it for the certain jobs that we need to accomplish?
I love calling the should problem the Jurassic Park problem.
I know,
Should
right?
versus could. I'm totally gonna borrow that.
Totally do it. I'm trying to make it a thing because it totally is that.
I love that. I love that. So as we think about the technologies that we're unlocking right now and the shifts in the global workforce,
Mhm.
if you sort of unlock your wildest imagination, what do you hope that the future of work 10 years from now is going to look like?
I think for me, as I look at where work will be in 10 years, the one big thing is I hope that we've been able to, one, deploy things like AI in a way that actually will be more proactive with us and actually
Mm.
be. I joked about this with somebody the other day. I hope something like AI is not the intern. Like everyone says, like, it's your intern. I'm like, I don't want it to be my intern. My intern always asks me what to do. And that when they're done with that thing, they come back and ask me what to do the next thing to do. I want my principal star on my team. That's what I want AI. I want the one that's proactive and be like, hey, have you thought about this? And be the one supporting me. So I'm really hoping we get to that point from a technology perspective there. But I think that is going to enable us from a way we work perspective to actually figure out how we create more decentralized teams, because it
Mm.
kind of goes back to that first thread we pulled on here today around autonomy and alignment. Because for me, I think my goal is always to try to give the most autonomy possible to my teams, because I truly do believe that that level of autonomy is what will, that superpower, it's the superpower behind change. It's the thing that enables people feeling empowered, feeling purpose. And so whenever I have to put structure, so going back to minimal viable structure, I also know that I'm sacrificing some autonomy for that. Like
Sure.
it's just a trade-off. My
Sure.
hope is that in 10 years, we've been able to use tooling in a way that gives us the ability to not have to make that sacrifice. Where now you've got teams that can work however they want, and we've got something that's translating this stuff in the back end. Because now all of a sudden I could be a team, and what's going to be cool about this is that as teams start to decentralize, teams can almost become their own little APIs, their own little service agents out there where, you know what, they can support different parts of the business. And the thing is through the help of technology, they're able to plug in a way that, bringing in a brand new team that's not in your workflow and not in your ways of working, bringing in it is very jarring. In the future, I hope that that is not a jarring thing. There's always going to be the human elements that we have to think about, the ways of working, the how do we have the handshake across teams. But my hope is that what we'll see is that we'll see a lot of those other friction points disappear, and it really just becomes a human conversation because all the technology solves itself behind the scenes. It's like, hey, I figured out how I plug into your system, and that's going to allow people to then to teams to stay. Even for me, I'm a big believer in long-term teaming. I think it builds a
Sure.
lot of trust, psychological safety, things like that. It's going to allow teams to stay together, but then move to different problems. It'll
Mm.
allow them, and as teams break apart, that's totally going to be a normal thing. They can then go in and plug into areas without skipping that heartbeat. And so I think that's to me one of the biggest things I'm excited for is I think some of that decentralization, but and that increase of autonomy through the help of technology.
Yeah, I'm with you in that one. That idea of harnessing all of the data that is out there with a distributed work model around
Hmm.
how we're communicating, how we're going through our day, how we're working. And now we have this technology that is amazing at processing all of that data. Wouldn't it be amazing if it could actually be constantly evaluating and giving us feedback as a
Yes.
leader on how are you doing at optimizing
Yeah.
both alignment and autonomy throughout all of your teams so that they're their most adaptive and you're maximizing ability? Like, wouldn't that be so cool to be able to have
It's
something like
it's
that?
the Clippy we all wanted, you know. It's not the Clippy we got, but it's the Clippy we want. Take that, Microsoft. That's your call to action out there. Let's make it happen.
Honestly, I would love to see a Clippy comeback, like a Clippy 2.0
I know,
actually
right? Like, I
actually
don't know why they
supercharged.
didn't do that with Copilot. And their PR team probably had something to say about it. But it's like, oh, you should have done that. Had brought Clippy back.
Bring us Clippy back.
Yeah, I know. I think with hashtag bring Clippy back, right? There we
I-
go. We'll start the movement.
I'm here for it. What is one challenge that is ever present throughout the workforce right now that you think we're not talking enough about?
Bad teamwork.
Mm,
Honestly, I think it's something that we never my opinion on this is that the pandemic and the decentral really not even the pandemic, it was the distribution of people beyond an office revealed to us the fractures that were always in our teams, but we were able to cover up for through the fact that you and I were sitting next to each other and be like, hey man, like what'd they just say? Or I don't understand what we're doing. All of a sudden when we're distributed, it caused us to start realizing, wow, we don't have a clear understanding of our how we work, what's the thing we're working towards, who does what in our team. It became and I think it was always one of those things where back in the day it was it was almost preached as like a positive thing that we're like, well, no, we want everyone to do everything on our team. And I'm like, no, that's not a good idea. It's you need to have some like clarity in terms of well, who's doing what? Who's in? Yeah, you can have backups and stuff like that, but like need to understand roles and responsibilities. And so for me, what happened out of as we distributed was that we got clarity in the fact that what we think all these big problems around technology and things these are the issues. No, we just suck at teaming, and it's
yeah.
one of those things we never got intentional about. And so I've been on a I've been on a bit of a quest over the last few years to really bring that out and say, at the end of the day, our teamwork foundation needs to be strong. And if it's not, the rest of the structure will crumble. And it doesn't have to be hard either. And that's the big thing. For me, I believe we actually even added last time we put out some stuff on this. We called it team shaping, and it was all about how do you get those fundamentals. And for me, it really isn't very much you have to do. You have to get intentional with things like we call it a team poster. Like talk about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how do you measure success. Like let's get clear on that as a team. Let's build working agreements. I'm a huge advocate for working agreements to get clear on those implicit assumptions we make. So often, especially when we're distributed, we read into things that aren't even there and make assumptions about things. And so let's get really clear on things like how do we communicate with each other? How do we escalate issues with each other? How do we improve? And actually build that as a mechanism that our team all agrees on. Roles and responsibilities, I mentioned that. And then one of
Yep.
the other big ones that for us is this idea of building out your network of teams. And what we mean by this is that realization that, again, teams don't accomplish anything on their own. They need other teams. It's that aspect that you need that alignment. But to get that minimal viable structure, really what you need to do is you need to build a person to person relationship with those other teams. So identify who's in your sphere of influence, who are the teams that you need to work with, And then find those few that you need to be like, you know what, we need a better relationship. Because I think we've all probably been in one of those situations where some point in our career we worked with a team where we were like, oh, I don't like working with that team. I'm going to try to bypass that team. And again, that saves nobody's day. And so for us, it's about like, how do you build a relationship? So it's not even about the work, it's about the relationship between those teams. And so for us, we look at those four things. If you can do those four things, you've built the foundation. You've laid the concrete pad to actually build something up on. And for me, that's been one of my huge things I've been championing is how do we get back to some of those basics?
Yeah, and the stance I take is no system exists without someone who takes responsibility for it.
Love
And
that.
so it's it's a special moment right now because we all sort of feel like there's these trickling networks of crises that are unfolding
Hmm.
constantly, and there's loneliness that is at its highest, depression is at its
Hmm.
highest, worker stress levels are at their highest. You know what that means? There's huge opportunity right now for people to step up and say, I'm going to be a leader. And that just means
Yep.
I'm going to choose to take
100%.
responsibility for the relationships that are within my purview, whether they're people that work with me, work for me, people
Hmm.
who I interact with. And to your point, as far as actually trying to upgrade how those relationships function or how those teams function, it's not necessarily radically complex. It's simple. You can look at the most elite sports teams that are out there that
Hmm.
have a ton of money behind them and then actually harness what we've learned in the behavior science for the last few decades. They have the
Yep.
blueprint for us, and they're doing those very things that you're talking about around like really defining purpose and getting clear on what are we doing, how are we doing it, what are our roles and responsibilities, having shared agreements that we can create processes from, and then building out those networks so people can be connected, they can be clear on what they're working on, and you can actually optimize people's ability to regulate stress and do hard things together.
100%. And I think you bring up such a great example with like things like elite sports team and stuff, because really when you peel that back and you look at that science that's out there, some of that research, they're not doing anything radical, you
They're
know?
all
I mean,
saying the same stuff over and over
yeah,
again.
exactly. Exactly. It goes back to, it goes back to things like what Dan Pink says about purpose, it's like the autonomy, purpose, and then what's the other one?
Connectedness.
Mastery, it's like
Yeah.
having those sorts of people want those. When you build those together in a team and then you build in the ability to align each other around that, it unlocks everything. And so I think it's one of those things where I think it's still an epidemic out there that we have. And to your point earlier about leaders, people, you don't have to be a people manager to say you do this. If you're out there and you're listening and you're like, you know what, my team isn't really aligned on what we do. Ask your team for an hour to sit down and have that conversation. Fill it out. If you need help, go out to our team playbook. We've got the play out there. We've got the steps on how you have that simple conversation and have it, because even if that conversation just is you net like two or three things out of it, you now have two or three things that you as a team are fully aligned on, and that is more
Yes.
than you had before.
Yes. And to your point, with maintaining the systems of how you collaborate with that minimum viable structure, minimum viable product, just like you would with a technology that's your product for your business,
Mhm.
it's a dialogue between you and the users. And
Yes.
so it's the same thing as a manager. It's unlocking having better dialogue with the people that work with you or work for you so you can ask them for what they need so they can be part of shaping that and then keeping that conversation continuous in a systemized way.
100%. 100%.
Beautiful. Well, Mark, thanks so much for being here. If people are listening and they're like, okay, I'm really liking these ideas. Mark mentioned he has a course out there. I wonder what other sort of content he has out there. Where can folks find you?
So find me on LinkedIn. It's one of my places. So you definitely find me there. You can also find me on YouTube. I'll be underneath there, underneath Mark Kruth. And then also check out Atlassian's content. We've got, like I mentioned, things like the team playbook, Atlassian.com/team dash playbook. No paywall, no signups, no nothing like that. Again, it's just trying to unleash that potential. And you'll find all these step by step plays that give you everything you need to do to play with these different types of problems. So I always say, start with the problem, find a way to discover that problem, and then start coming up with ways to solution. And this will give you those first few steps. So definitely check those out. And I always tell everyone out there, as a modern work coach, my goal is to help everybody. So if you're out there listening and you'd like some help, if you're thinking about this and if you're chewing on an idea and not sure on how to handle it, reach out. Again, LinkedIn's out there for me. I'd be happy to chat with you.
Amen. Well, Mark, I'm leaving this conversation with some awesome ideas and some cool phrasings of things, and I'm leaving with
Yes.
a little bit more inspiration. And I'm feeling fired up. Like if I had matches in my pocket to light some of these torches you're carrying, I would.
I love it. I love it. Let's light those torches.
Amen. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, everyone.